The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Thomas McKenna's weathered face as he guided his tired horse along the dusty trail. His clothes were torn, his water nearly gone, his stomach growled with a hunger that had been his constant companion for 3 days. The failed gold prospector had lost everything in a poker game to Town's back, leaving him with nothing but his faithful horse, Ranger. And the clothes on his back? Thomas had been traveling for weeks, moving from one mining town to another, always chasing rumors of gold strikes that never materialized. His dreams of striking it rich had slowly crumbled into the harsh reality of survival in the unforgiving desert. The horse beneath him was as exhausted as he was, its once proud stride now reduced to a weary shuffle. As the afternoon heat reached its peak, Thomas spotted something that made him pull on the reins. In the distance, near a cluster of red rocks, he could see smoke rising from what appeared to be a small campfire. His heart raced with both hope and caution. In this territory, you never knew who you might encounter. Drawing closer, Thomas saw a young Apache woman sitting alone by the fire. She appeared to be around 20 years old, with long black hair, braided with colorful beads, and wearing traditional clothing decorated with intricate patterns. Her dark eyes watched him approach with neither fear nor aggression, just calm curiosity. The woman gestured for him to dismount and join her by the fire. Despite his wariness, Thomas's desperate thirst overcame his caution. She offered him water from a clay vessel, and he drank gratefully, the cool liquid bringing life back to his parched throat. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse from days of little conversation. "I'm Thomas." The woman smiled and pointed to herself. "Ayana," she said in accented English. "It means eternal blossom." As they sat together, Thomas noticed that Ayana seemed fascinated by his horse. She walked around Ranger, examining him closely, running her hands along his coat and checking his hooves. The horse, despite his exhaustion, seemed to respond well to her gentle touch, through a mixture of broken English and hand gestures. Ayana managed to communicate that she was impressed with the animal. She explained that she had been separated from her tribe during a storm 3 days earlier and had been waiting for them to find her at this familiar meeting spot. Thomas found himself oddly comfortable with this young woman. There was something peaceful about her presence that made him forget his troubles for a moment. She shared dried meat and berries with him, the first real food he had tasted in days. As the sun began to set, painting the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Ayana pointed to a small leather pouch she carried. From it, she produced a single silver dollar, worn smooth by countless hands. She held it up and then pointed to Ranger. Thomas stared at her in disbelief. Was she offering to buy his horse for $1? The absurdity of the situation struck him. Here he was, a man who had lost everything chasing dreams of wealth, being offered the smallest possible payment for his most valuable possession by a young Apache woman stranded in the desert. Ranger was worth at least $50, maybe more, to the right buyer. The horse had been his companion through countless adventures, his transportation, and often his only source of comfort during the loneliest nights. But looking at the earnest expression on Ayana's face, Thomas felt something stir within him that he hadn't experienced in years. Compassion. He thought about his situation. He was broke, hungry, and had no real plan for the future. The horse was eating into his meager resources, requiring water and feed that he could barely afford. Perhaps most importantly, he sensed that this exchange meant something more to Ayana than simple commerce. The young woman seemed to understand his hesitation. She stood and walked to her small bundle of possessions, retrieving a beautifully crafted necklace made of turquoise and silver. She offered it to him along with the dollar, but Thomas gently pushed the necklace back toward her. "Just the dollar," he said. Surprising himself with the words, Ayana's eyes widened with amazement and gratitude. She pressed the silver coin into his palm and immediately went to Ranger, speaking to the horse in her native language in soothing tones. The animal seemed to understand that his ownership was changing hands, and he nuzzled against her shoulder affectionately as night fell. They made camp together. Ayana shared more food with Thomas and showed him how to identify edible plants in the desert. She taught him a few words in Apache, and he helped her practice her English. Despite the language barrier, they found ways to communicate that went beyond words. That night, as Thomas lay looking up at the star-filled sky, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. He had just traded away his most valuable possession for $1 to a woman he had met only hours earlier. By any practical measure, it was the act of a fool. But something deep inside told him differently. There had been something in Ayana's eyes when she looked at the horse, a connection that went beyond mere desire for transportation. She had treated the animal with reverence and respect that Thomas had rarely seen. As he drifted off to sleep, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter in the middle of nowhere was going to change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The silver dollar felt warm in his pocket, and for the first time in months, he felt a strange sense of peace about an uncertain future. The desert wind whispered through the rocks around their camp, carrying with it the promise of adventure and transformation that would soon unfold, in ways that neither Thomas nor Ayana could have predicted. The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Thomas McKenna's weathered face as he guided his tired horse along the dusty trail. His clothes were torn, his water nearly gone, and his stomach growled with a hunger that had been his constant companion for 3 days. The failed gold prospector had lost everything in a poker game 2 towns back, leaving him with nothing but his faithful horse, Ranger, and the clothes on his back. Thomas had been traveling for weeks, moving from one mining town to another, always chasing rumors of gold strikes that never materialized. His dreams of striking it rich had slowly crumbled into the harsh reality of survival in the unforgiving desert. The horse beneath him was as exhausted as he was, its one proud stride now reduced to a weary shuffle as the afternoon heat reached its peak. Thomas spotted something that made him pull on the reins. In the distance, near a cluster of red rocks, he could see smoke rising from what appeared to be a small campfire. His heart raced with both hope and caution. In this territory, you never knew who you might encounter. Drawing closer, Thomas saw a young Apache woman sitting alone by the fire. She appeared to be around 20 years old, long black hair braided with colorful beads and wearing traditional clothing decorated with intricate patterns. Her dark eyes watched him approach with neither fear nor aggression, just calm curiosity. The woman gestured for him to dismount and join her by the fire. Despite his wariness, Thomas's desperate thirst overcame his caution. She offered him water from a clay vessel, and he drank gratefully, the cool liquid bringing life back to his parched throat. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse from days of little conversation. "I'm Thomas." The woman smiled and pointed to herself. "Ayana," she said in accented English. "It means eternal blossom." As they sat together, Thomas noticed that Ayana seemed fascinated by his horse. She walked around Ranger, examining him closely, running her hands along his coat and checking his hooves. The horse, despite his exhaustion, seemed to respond well to her gentle touch, through a mixture of broken English and hand gestures. Ayana managed to communicate that she was impressed with the animal. She explained that she had been separated from her tribe during a storm 3 days earlier and had been waiting for them to find her at this familiar meeting spot. Thomas found himself oddly comfortable with this young woman. There was something peaceful about her presence that made him forget his troubles for a moment. She shared dried meat and berries with him, the first real food he had tasted in days. As the sun began to set, painting the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Ayana pointed to a small leather pouch she carried. From it, she produced a single silver dollar, worn smooth by countless hands. She held it up and then pointed to Ranger. Thomas stared at her in disbelief. Was she offering to buy his horse for $1? The absurdity of the situation struck him. Here he was, a man who had lost everything chasing dreams of wealth, being offered the smallest possible payment for his most valuable possession by a young Apache woman stranded in the desert. Ranger was worth at least $50, maybe more to the right buyer. The horse had been his companion through countless adventures, his transportation, and often his only source of comfort during the loneliest nights. But looking at the earnest expression on Ayana's face, Thomas felt something stir within him that he hadn't experienced in years. Compassion? He thought about his situation. He was broke, hungry, and had no real plan for the future. The horse was eating into his meager resources, requiring water and feed that he could barely afford. Perhaps most importantly, he sensed that this exchange meant something more to Ayanna than simple commerce. The young woman seemed to understand his hesitation. She stood and walked to her small bundle of possessions. Retrieving a beautifully crafted necklace made of turquoise and silver, she offered it to him along with the dollar. But Thomas gently pushed the necklace back toward her. "Just the dollar," he said, surprising himself with the words. Ayanna's eyes widened with amazement and gratitude. She pressed the silver coin into his palm and immediately went to Ranger. Speaking to the horse in her native language in soothing tones, the animal seemed to understand that his ownership was changing hands, and he nuzzled against her shoulder affectionately. As night fell, they made camp together. Ayanna shared more food with Thomas and showed him how to identify edible plants in the desert. She taught him a few words in Apache, and he helped her practice her English. Despite the language barrier, they found ways to communicate that went beyond words. That night, as Thomas lay looking up at the star-filled sky, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. He had just traded away his most valuable possession for a single dollar to a woman he had met only hours earlier. By any practical measure, it was the act of a fool. But something deep inside told him differently. There had been something in Ayanna's eyes when she looked at the horse, a connection that went beyond mere desire for transportation. She had treated the animal with reverence and respect that Thomas had rarely seen as he drifted off to sleep. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter in the middle of nowhere was going to change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The silver dollar felt warm in his pocket, and for the first time in months, he felt a strange sense of peace about an uncertain future. The desert wind whispered through the rocks around their camp, carrying with it the promise of adventure and transformation that would soon unfold, in ways that neither Thomas nor Ayanna could have predicted. The morning sun painted the desert landscape in soft golden hues as Thomas awakened to the sound of approaching horses. His heart jumped as he saw Ayanna sitting calmly by the dying embers of their fire, showing no signs of alarm. In the distance, a group of Apache riders was approaching their camp. Thomas scrambled to his feet, his hand instinctively moving toward the small knife at his belt. Stories of Apache raids and conflicts with settlers filled his mind, but Ayanna placed a gentle hand on his arm and shook her head. Speaking softly in Apache, the riders drew closer, and Thomas could see they were a search party of about 8 men, their faces painted and their horses moving with practiced precision across the rocky terrain. At their head rode an older man with gray streaking his long black hair and wearing an elaborate headdress that marked him as someone of importance. When the riders reached their camp, Ayanna stood and spoke rapidly in Apache to the leader. Thomas watched as her gestures included pointing to him and to Ranger, who was now grazing nearby under the watchful eye of one of the warriors. The older man dismounted and approached Thomas. Despite his intimidating appearance, his eyes held wisdom and curiosity rather than hostility. Through Ayanna's translation, Thomas learned that this was Chief Running Bear, Ayanna's father and leader of their band. The chief examined Thomas carefully, taking in his worn clothes and weathered appearance. He spoke to his daughter at length, occasionally glancing at Thomas and the horse. Thomas caught a few words he recognized from Ayanna's lessons the night before, but the conversation was largely beyond his understanding. Finally, Ayanna turned to Thomas with an expression of excitement mixed with nervousness. "My father asks why white man trade good horse for $1, she said, her English more careful now in front of her people. Thomas looked from Ayanna to her father, realizing that this moment would determine how the Apache viewed him. He could lie, make up some story about the horse being sick or difficult, but something about the chief's penetrating gaze told him that honesty was the only path. "Forward, your daughter was alone and needed help," Thomas said simply. "The horse seemed to like her, and she needed him more than I did," Ayanna translated. And Thomas watched as the chief's expression shifted subtly. The older man stepped closer and placed a weathered hand on Thomas's shoulder, speaking in a voice that carried the weight of authority and respect. "My father says you show honor," Ayanna explained. "He says most white men take from Apache, not give. He wants to know what you need. Thomas thought carefully before responding. I need work, food, and a place to rest. I've been traveling for months looking for gold, but I think I've been looking in the wrong places for the wrong things. The chief listened to the translation and nodded slowly. He spoke to his warriors, and Thomas could sense a shift in the group's attitude toward him. Where there had been wariness before, there was now something approaching acceptance. One of the younger warriors brought forward a horse, a beautiful painted mare with intelligent eyes and a spirited bearing. The chief gestured toward the animal and spoke to Thomas through Ayanna. My father says you gave with good heart. So Apache? Give with good heart, she translated. This horse's gift. Her name is Wind Dancer. She is fast and smart. Thomas stared in amazement. The mare was clearly valuable, worth far more than his old ranger. But before he could protest, the chief continued speaking. Ayanna's eyes lit up as she listened to her father. My father says our tribe goes to winter camp in mountains. You come with us if you want. We can use man who knows white man's ways, but has Apache heart. The offer hung in the air like morning mist. Thomas looked around at the faces surrounding him, searching for any sign of deception or reluctance. Instead, he saw only genuine invitation and curious interest. What would I do? Thomas asked. The chief spoke again, and Ayanna smiled as she translated. You help tribe trade with white settlers. You know their language, their ways. But first, you learn our ways. You live with us, hunt with us. Learn what it means to be part of tribe. Thomas felt overwhelmed by the generosity being shown to him. Yesterday he had been a broken man with nothing but a tired horse and a handful of coins. Now he was being offered not just transportation and shelter, but a place in a community. Why? He asked, looking directly at the chief. Why help a stranger? The chief's response came through Ayanna with a weight that spoke of ancient wisdom. My father says the spirits brought you to us. Your heart showed itself when you helped, daughter of chief. Apache people know that good heart in white man is rare gift. We honor that gift. As the group prepared to travel, Thomas found himself mounted on Wind Dancer, surrounded by Apache warriors who had welcomed him as one of their own. The mare responded to his touch with enthusiasm, and he could tell she would be a loyal companion. Chief running, Bear rode beside him as they began their journey toward the tribal winter grounds. Through Ayanna, who had reclaimed Ranger and rode nearby, the chief began to share stories of his people and their ways of life. Thomas learned that the Apache valued courage, honesty, and generosity above all else. They believed that the spirits guided certain meetings, and that his encounter with Ayanna had been no accident. The chief explained that their tribe had been observing changes in the white settlers' behavior and needed someone who could help them navigate the increasingly complex relationships with nearby towns. As they rode through the spectacular desert landscape, Thomas began to understand that his life was taking a turn he never could have imagined. The dollar in his pocket that had once represented the sum total of his worth now felt like a token of something much more valuable: acceptance, trust. In the beginning of a new chapter in his life, the sun climbed higher as the small party made steady progress toward the distant mountains, carrying Thomas away from his old life as a failed prospector and toward a future filled with possibilities he was only beginning to understand. The journey to the winter camp took 3 days, and each mile revealed more of the Apache way of life to Thomas. He watched in amazement as the warriors moved across the landscape with an understanding of the land that seemed almost supernatural. They knew where to find water in seemingly barren areas, which plants could provide food or medicine, and how to read the subtle signs that indicated the presence of game. On the second day, Chief Running Bear began testing Thomas in ways that weren't immediately obvious. When they stopped to rest, the chief would ask him questions about the white settlements, the trading posts, and the territorial government. Thomas answered honestly, sharing what he knew about prices, laws, and the attitudes of various town officials toward the Apache people. What impressed The chief most was Thomas's willingness to admit when he didn't know something rather than trying to appear knowledgeable. This honesty, Ayanna explained, was highly valued among her people, where false wisdom could lead to disaster in the harsh desert environment as they rode. Thomas noticed that several of the warriors were observing him carefully, not with suspicion, but with the keen interest of people evaluating a potential addition to their family. He learned that Apache society was built on extended family groups, and acceptance into the tribe meant becoming part of something much deeper than a simple business relationship. On the evening of the second day, as they camped in a protected canyon, one of the younger warriors approached Thomas. His name was Swift Arrow, and he spoke enough English to communicate directly. "You shoot?" Swift Arrow asked, pointing to Thomas's old rifle. Thomas nodded, though he knew his marksmanship was only adequate. Swift Arrow set up a target using a piece of bark against a distant rock and gestured for Thomas to try his skill. Thomas took careful aim and managed to hit near the center of the makeshift target. The Apache warriors murmured approval. But then Swift Arrow took his own weapon, a traditional bow, and split Thomas's bullet hole with an arrow from twice the distance. Rather than feeling embarrassed, Thomas laughed and applauded the incredible shot. His reaction pleased the warriors, who had expected the white man to be offended or defensive about being outshot. "You learn Apache way?" Swift Arrow asked with a grin. "I'd be honored too," Thomas replied. That evening, as they sat around the campfire, Chief Running Bear spoke to the group about the challenges facing their people. Ayanna translated for Thomas, explaining that the tribe needed to find ways to trade for supplies and ammunition without being cheated by dishonest merchants. "Many white traders think Apache are stupid," the chief said through his daughter. "They offer bad prices for good furs and horses. They sell us broken guns and watered-down whiskey. We need someone they trust but who understands fair trade." Thomas began to see the role he might play in the tribe's future. His knowledge of white trading practices, combined with the trust he was earning from the Apache, could help bridge the gap between two very different worlds. When they finally reached the winter camp on the third day, Thomas was struck by the sight that greeted him. Nestled in a sheltered valley between towering red cliffs was a community of traditional Apache dwellings called wickiups. These dome-shaped structures made of wooden frames covered with brush and hides were perfectly suited to the environment. Providing warmth in winter and coolness in summer, children ran out to greet the returning search party, their faces bright with curiosity when they saw Thomas. Women emerged from their daily tasks to welcome their men home, and elders gathered to hear the news of their journey. Chief Running Bear called for a gathering that evening, and Thomas found himself the center of attention as the chief told the story of how he had traded his horse to Ayanna for $1. The telling drew gasps of amazement and nods of approval from the assembled tribe members. An elderly woman approached Thomas after the chief finished speaking. Her face was deeply lined with age, and her eyes held the wisdom of many decades. Through Ayanna, she introduced herself as Grandmother Willow, the tribe's medicine woman and keeper of traditions. "She says your spirit is good." Ayanna translated as the old woman spoke. "She wants to know if you will stay with us long enough to learn our ways properly, or if you will leave when winter ends." Thomas looked around at the faces surrounding him, seeing hope and acceptance in their expressions. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere. "I'd like to stay as long as you'll have me," he said. "I want to learn everything you're willing to teach." Grandmother Willow smiled and spoke to Chief Running Bear, who nodded approvingly. The old woman then took Thomas by the arm and led him to a small wickiup that had been prepared for him. "She says this is your home now," Ayanna explained. "Tomorrow, your education begins." As Thomas settled into his new dwelling, he marveled at how his life had changed in just a few days. The simple decision to trade his horse for $1 had opened doors he never knew existed. He was now part of an Apache community, trusted with their hopes for better relationships with the white world. That night, as he lay on the comfortable bedding of furs and woven blankets, Thomas could hear the sounds of the camp settling down for the night. Children's laughter mixed with the quiet conversations of adults and somewhere in the distance, someone was playing a flute with a haunting melody that seemed to capture the spirit of the desert. Itself, the silver dollar remained in his pocket, but it no longer represented his total worth. Instead, it had become a symbol of the unexpected journey that had brought him to this place. As he drifted off to sleep, Thomas wondered what tomorrow would bring and how much his life would continue to change. Outside his wickiup, Wind Dancer grazed contentedly with the other horses, and the stars shone down on a man who had found something far more valuable than the gold he had spent so many months seeking. Thomas's education in Apache ways began at dawn with the sound of activity throughout the camp. Ayanna appeared at his wickiup entrance. Carrying a steaming bowl of what he would learn was a nutritious corn and meat stew that formed a staple of the Apache diet. "Today, you'll learn to be Apache," she said with a smile that reminded him why he had made the trade that brought him here. His first teacher was Swift Arrow, who took him to understand the layout and organization of the camp. Thomas discovered that everything in Apache society had purpose and meaning. The placement of each wickiup, the organization of daily activities, even the way people moved through the camp followed traditions developed over generations of desert survival. Apache people live with land, not against it, Swift Arrow explained as they walked among the dwellings. Everything we do helps tribes survive and grow strong. Thomas watched women grinding corn and preparing hides, their movements efficient and practiced. Children helped with appropriate tasks, learning through participation rather than formal instruction. Men worked on weapons, tools, and planned hunting expeditions that would provide for the community's needs. What struck Thomas most was the sense of shared responsibility that permeated every aspect of camp life. No one went hungry, while others ate well, and everyone contributed according to their abilities and circumstances. His second lesson came from Grandmother Willow, who taught him about Apache spiritual beliefs and their connection to the natural world. Through Ayanna's patient translation, the medicine woman explained how the Apache saw themselves as part of a larger web of life that included all plants, animals, and natural forces. "White man thinks he owns land," Grandmother Willow said, her weathered hands gesturing toward the surrounding cliffs and desert. "Apache knows land owns us. We are children of earth and sky. We must live in harmony with all relations." Thomas found these concepts challenging at first. Having grown up in a culture that emphasized individual ownership and dominion over nature, but as he spent time observing the Apache way of life, he began to see the wisdom in their approach. Chief Running Bear spent the afternoon teaching Thomas about tribal governance and decision-making. Unlike the hierarchical systems Thomas knew from white society, Apache leadership was based on consensus and earned respect rather than inherited position or wealth. Chief guides people, but people choose path, Running Bear explained through his daughter. Good leader listens more than speaks, serves more than commands. As the days passed, Thomas threw himself into learning with an enthusiasm that impressed his teachers. He practiced with traditional weapons under Swift Arrow's guidance, learning to use a bow with increasing accuracy. His attempts at tracking and hunting skills amused the children, who giggled at his clumsy early efforts but cheered his gradual improvement. The women taught him practical skills like identifying edible plants, preparing traditional foods, and understanding the properties of various herbs and roots used for medicine. Thomas discovered that Apache knowledge of the desert environment was incredibly sophisticated, representing centuries of accumulated wisdom about survival in harsh conditions. 2 weeks into his stay, Chief Running Bear announced that it was time to test Thomas's usefulness as a translator and negotiator. A group of white traders had established a temporary trading post about a day's ride from the camp, and the tribe needed supplies for the winter months ahead. "You come with us," the chief told Thomas. "You help us get fair trade. We see if white men listen to you." The trading expedition consisted of Chief Running Bear, Swift Arrow, 3 other warriors, Ayanna and Thomas. They brought with them beautifully crafted items that the Apache had made during the autumn months: beadwork, pottery, woven blankets, and expertly tanned hides. The trading post was a rough, collection of canvas tents and wooden structures built around a central area where merchants displayed their goods. Thomas could see immediately that the traders were the type of men who would take advantage of the Apache if given the chance. The head trader, a heavy-set man named Morrison, greeted the Apache with exaggerated friendliness that barely concealed his condescension. Thomas watched as Morrison examined the Apache goods, making offers that were clearly far below their actual value. "These blankets are nice enough," Morrison said, "but there's not much call for Indian work around here. I can give you $2 each for them." Thomas knew that the blankets, their intricate patterns and superior craftsmanship, would sell for at least $10 each in any major town. He also noticed that Morrison's eyes lingered on the weapons and ammunition displayed in his tent, items that were restricted in trade with Apache tribes. "Mr. Morrison," Thomas said, stepping forward, "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the value of these goods." Morrison looked at Thomas with surprise and suspicion. "Who are you? You with these Indians?" "I'm Thomas McKenna, and I'm representing Chief Running Bear in these negotiations. These blankets are worth considerably more than your initial offer, and I think you know it." The atmosphere in the trading post shifted as Morrison realized he was dealing with someone who understood both Apache quality and white market values. Thomas proceeded to negotiate fair prices for each item, drawing on his knowledge of trading practices while maintaining respect for Apache dignity. What impressed Chief Running Bear most was how Thomas handled Morrison's attempts to introduce alcohol into the trade. When Morrison suggested trading whiskey for some of the Apache horses, Thomas firmly declined. "Chief Running Bear has made it clear that his people have no interest in alcohol," Thomas said. "They're looking for practical goods, ammunition for hunting, metal tools, and quality fabric." By the end of the trading session, the Apache had received nearly 3 times what Morrison had initially offered, and Thomas had earned the respect of both sides. Morrison, despite being outmaneuvered, admitted grudgingly that Thomas had conducted the negotiations fairly. On the ride back to camp, Chief Running Bear spoke at length with his daughter in Apache. When they stopped to rest, Hiana approached Thomas with an expression of excitement and pride. "My father says you did well today," she said. "You showed that you can walk in both worlds without losing your honor in either one." Swift Arrow, who had watched the entire negotiation with intense interest, clapped Thomas on the shoulder. "You are becoming true Apache brother," he said in his limited English. As they returned to the winter camp with their trading goods, Thomas realized that he had found his place in this new world. He was no longer the failed prospector who had stumbled into their lives, but a valuable member of the community who could help bridge the gap between two cultures. That evening, as the tribe celebrated their successful trading expedition, Thomas sat by the fire watching children play and adults share stories of the day's events. The silver dollar in his pocket had brought him to this moment, but it was his own choices and actions that had earned him a permanent place among the Apache people. The morning after the council meeting, Thomas volunteered for what might be the most dangerous mission of his life. He would ride to the territorial capital to meet with government officials and try to prevent a war that would destroy Chief Running Bear's peaceful band along with the guilty. "Raiders, you understand the risk," Chief Running Bear said as Thomas prepared Wind Dancer for the journey. "White authorities may not believe Apache can be peaceful. They may arrest you as traitor to your own people." Thomas checked his saddlebags one final time, ensuring he had the documents and gifts that might help convince the officials of his band's innocence. "I understand, but this is my family now. I can't let them be punished for crimes they didn't commit." Ayana approached as he was about to mount his horse, her face showing the fear she was trying to hide. "Be careful," she said softly. "Come back to us." The 3-day ride to the territorial capital gave Thomas time to plan his approach carefully. He knew that success would depend on presenting the Apache perspective in terms that white officials could understand and accept, while also demonstrating his own credibility as someone who could speak for Chief Running Bear's band. The territorial capital was a growing town that reflected the rapid changes taking place throughout the Southwest. New buildings rose alongside older adobe structures, and the streets bustled with merchants, soldiers, and settlers who represented the expanding American presence in the region. Thomas presented himself at the territorial governor's office, requesting an urgent meeting about the recent Apache attacks. The secretary, a nervous young man overwhelmed by the crisis atmosphere, initially tried to dismiss him as just another settler with complaints about Indian problems. "I'm not here to complain," Thomas explained patiently. "I'm here to prevent a war that will cost lives on both sides unnecessarily." After considerable persistence, Thomas found himself sitting across from Governor William Hayes, a career politician who had been appointed to his position largely because of his reputation for taking a hard line against Indian resistance. "Mr. McKenna," the governor said, scanning a report on his desk, "I'm told you claim to represent peaceful Apache bands. Frankly, not sure there is such a thing as a peaceful Apache." Thomas had expected this attitude and came prepared with evidence of Chief Running Bear's band's peaceful intentions. He produced letters from Morrison and other traders who could testify to the tribe's honest dealing, along with samples of the high-quality craftwork that demonstrated their focus on productive activities rather than raiding Governor Hayes. "I've lived with Chief Running Bear's people for 4 months," Thomas said. "They're farmers and hunters who want nothing more than to be left alone to live their traditional way of life. Punishing them for the crimes of hostile raiders would be like arresting you for the actions of outlaws in Texas simply because you're both white Americans." The comparison made the governor pause, and Thomas pressed his advantage. He explained the complex relationships between different Apache groups, emphasizing that Chief Running Bear's band had actually helped prevent conflicts by maintaining peaceful relations with nearby settlements. "What exactly are you proposing?" Governor Hayes asked, his tone suggesting genuine interest, despite his skepticism. Thomas outlined a plan he had developed during his ride to the capital. Chief Running Bear's band would serve as intermediaries between the territorial government and other Apache groups, using their knowledge and relationships to help identify and isolate the actual raiders while protecting peaceful tribes from retaliation. The Apache, who attacked that wagon train, are led by a war chief named Red Wolf, Thomas explained. Chief Running Bear knows where his band operates and can help your forces locate them specifically. Rather than attacking every Apache group in the territory, the governor studied the maps Thomas had brought, which showed the locations of peaceful Apache camps in relation to known raider strongholds. The precision and detail of the information impressed him, as did Thomas's obvious knowledge of Apache culture and politics. "How do I know this isn't some elaborate trap?" Hayes asked bluntly. "How do I know your Chief Running Bear isn't working with these raiders?" Thomas had anticipated this question and pulled out his most convincing piece of evidence: a detailed account of the recent wagon train attack written in Apache pictographs by survivors from Red Wolf's own band, who had defected to Chief Running Bear's peaceful group. These men escaped from Red Wolf's camp because they disagreed with his warpath, Thomas explained as he translated the pictographic account. They came to Chief Running Bear asking for protection, and he granted it despite the risk to his own people. The pictographs told a story that corroborated the official reports of the attack while providing crucial details about Red Wolf's plans and methods that only someone with inside knowledge could have known. Governor Hayes called in his military advisors to examine the information. Colonel James Mitchell, territorial military commander, studied the Apache account with growing excitement. "Mr. McKenna, if this information is accurate, it could help us end Red Wolf's raids once and for all. But we'd need your Chief Running Bear to guide our forces and provide ongoing intelligence." Thomas negotiated carefully, knowing that any agreement would put Chief Running Bear's people at enormous risk. "The chief will help, but his people's safety must be guaranteed. They need assurance that they won't be attacked by your forces or forced onto a reservation if they cooperate." The discussions continued for 2 days, with Thomas serving as both negotiator and cultural interpreter. He helped the officials understand Apache motivations and methods, while ensuring that any agreement would protect his adopted family's interests. Finally, Governor Hayes agreed to a formal treaty that would recognize Chief Running Bear's band as allies of the territorial government. In exchange for their assistance in locating and capturing Red Wolf's raiders, the band would receive protection, trading privileges, and the right to remain on their traditional lands. This is highly irregular, Governor Hayes admitted as he signed the document. But if it prevents a costly war and stops the raids, it's worth trying. Thomas rode back to the Apache camp with the signed treaty and a small escort of territorial soldiers who would serve as visible proof of the new alliance. The journey gave him time to consider how dramatically his life had changed in just a few months, when he had traded his horse for $1. He had been a failed prospector with no future and no hope. Now he was returning to his chosen family as a successful diplomat who had potentially saved them from destruction. The silver dollar in his pocket had become a symbol of transformation that went far beyond his own personal circumstances. As the familiar red cliffs of the Apache winter camp came into view, Thomas saw Chief Running Bear and his warriors waiting to greet the returning party. The presence of territorial soldiers caused initial tension, but Thomas quickly explained the successful negotiations and the terms of the new alliance. That evening, as the tribes celebrated the agreement that would allow them to remain free and safe, Ayanna approached Thomas by the communal fire. Her eyes reflected the firelight as she spoke words that would complete his transformation from wandering prospector to Apache family member. "My father says you have proven yourself as a protector of our people," she said softly. "He gives permission for us to marry, if that is what you want." Thomas looked around at the faces of the people who had become his family. Seeing acceptance and love that he had never known in his previous life, the silver dollar had bought him much more than a horse. It had purchased a new identity, a purpose, and now a future with the woman he loved. 1 year later, Thomas stood at the edge of the same red cliffs where he had first encountered Ayanna. But everything about his life had transformed beyond recognition. The desperate, broken man who had traded his horse for $1 was gone, replaced by someone who had found his true calling in bridging two worlds that had seemed impossibly different. The alliance with the territorial government had proven successful beyond anyone's expectations. Using Chief Running Bear's knowledge and Thomas's diplomatic skills, the military forces had located and captured Red Wolf's raiding band within 3 months of the treaty signing. The operation had been completed without harm to any peaceful Apache groups, establishing a precedent for cooperation that other tribes were beginning to follow. Thomas had become something unique in the territorial landscape. A white man who was fully accepted as an Apache leader while maintaining the trust and respect of government officials. His success had attracted attention from Washington, where politicians were looking for new approaches to the complex challenges of Western expansion in Indian relations. The marriage ceremony between Thomas and Ayanna had taken place during the spring gathering, when several Apache bands came together for trade, celebration, and the renewal of family connections. The ceremony blended traditional Apache customs with adaptations that honored Thomas's transformed but still unique heritage. Chief Running Bear had spoken at the ceremony about the meaning of the union, explaining to the gathered tribes how Thomas represented the possibility of understanding between peoples who had often seen each other only as enemies. "This man came to us with nothing but good heart," the chief had said. "He gave when he had little to give, and in return, the spirits have blessed him with family and purpose. His marriage to my daughter shows that blood does not make family. Choice and honor make family now." As Thomas surveyed the peaceful camp below, he reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought him to this moment. Wind Dancer grazed nearby, still his faithful companion, while in the distance he could see Ayanna teaching a group of children the traditional skills that would help them navigate both Apache and white worlds. The camp itself had evolved to reflect the new realities created by the alliance. While maintaining their traditional way of life, the Apache had also established formal trading relationships and communication channels with nearby settlements. Young Apache men were learning to read and write English, while white visitors were learning to appreciate Apache knowledge of the land and its resources. Thomas's role had expanded far beyond what anyone had imagined when he first arrived as a starving prospector. He now served as an official territorial mediator, helping to resolve disputes between Apache bands and white settlers across a region that covered thousands of square miles. The work was challenging and sometimes dangerous, but it provided exactly the sense of purpose that had been missing from his earlier life. Instead of chasing elusive dreams of gold, he was building something lasting and meaningful that would benefit future generations. His success had also brought unexpected financial rewards. The territorial government paid him a substantial salary for his mediation services, and his reputation had attracted consulting requests from mining companies and railroad developers who needed to negotiate land use agreements with various Apache groups. The irony was not lost on Thomas that he had finally found the prosperity he had sought, but it had come through service to others rather than individual pursuit of wealth. The Apache understanding of community responsibility had taught him that true success was measured by how much you contributed to your people's welfare rather than how much you accumulated for yourself. On this particular evening, as the camp prepared for another important gathering, Thomas felt the weight of new responsibilities settling on his shoulders. Government officials from Washington were arriving the next day to discuss the possibility of expanding the peaceful alliance model to other regions of the country. Chief Running Bear approached. As Thomas stood watching the sunset paint the cliffs in brilliant shades of red and gold, the older man had become not just a father-in-law, but a mentor whose wisdom guided Thomas through the complex challenges of his unique position. "Big meeting tomorrow," the chief said in English, which he now spoke fluently after months of practice with Thomas. "Washington men want to learn Apache way of making peace." Thomas nodded, understanding the significance of the moment. If tomorrow's meetings went well, the alliance that had begun with his simple act of trading a horse for $1 could become a model for peaceful coexistence across the American West. "Are you ready?" Chief Running Bear asked, his weathered face showing both confidence and concern. Thomas fingered the silver dollar in his pocket. It's the same coin that Ayanna had offered him so many months ago. He had kept it as a reminder of how small acts of kindness could lead to transformative changes that extended far beyond the individuals involved. "I'm ready," he said. "We've built something here that proves people can find ways to live together with respect and mutual benefit. If we can help others understand that, maybe we can prevent a lot of unnecessary conflict." As they walked back toward the camp together, Thomas saw Ayanna approaching with news that would add personal joy to the professional significance of the coming day. "The baby will arrive in the spring," she said, her eyes bright with happiness and anticipation. Thomas felt his heart soar as he realized that the next generation of their unique family was already on the way. The child would grow up in a world where Apache and white cultures had learned to coexist, embodying the hope for understanding that had grown from a simple dollar transaction. That night, as the camp settled down for sleep before the important meetings, Thomas sat by the fire with Chief Running Bear and several tribal elders. They spoke of the future they were building together, of the children who would inherit a world where cooperation had replaced conflict. The silver dollar remained in Thomas's pocket, but its meaning had evolved far beyond its original purpose. It no longer represented the price of a horse or even the beginning of his new life. Instead, it had become a symbol of the profound truth that the most valuable things in life, love, family, purpose, and peace often grow from the smallest seeds of human kindness. As the stars appeared overhead and the desert wind whispered through the camp, Thomas knew that his transformation was complete. The prospector who had once searched for gold in the ground had found something infinitely more precious in the hearts and wisdom of the people who had welcomed him as family.